Gibraltar, 7th of November 1998. 56 years later, we honor the men who took part in Operation Torch. On the initiative of the Gibraltar American Council, the Gibraltar government commemorated Gibraltar's vital connection with Operation Torch with a specially commissioned plaque, which was unveiled by the Chief Minister at the foot of the American War Memorial in the presence of very special guests. Mrs. Anne Eisenhower, granddaughter of Commander-in-Chief Ike Eisenhower. Mrs. Toby Roosevelt, daughter-in-law to President Teddy Roosevelt. And Mr. Winston Churchill, grandson of Prime Minister Winston Churchill, as well as high-ranking American military. In the speech given by the Chief Minister before the unveiling of the plaque, he quoted from General Eisenhower's memoirs, describing his headquarters deep within Gibraltar.
He said, "The eternal darkness of the tunnels was here and there partially pierced by feeble electric bulbs. Damp, cold air in block-long passages was heavy with stagnation and did not noticeably respond to the clattering efforts of electric fans. Through the arched ceilings came a constant drip, drip of surface water that faithfully but drearily ticked off the seconds of the interminable, almost unendurable wait which always occurs between completion of a military plan and the moment that it begins." And he added, for good measure, that it was, and I quote him, "the most dismal setting we occupied during the war." But the reality as he knew it was that Gibraltar was and proved to be vital to the operation's success. It is not often enough remembered that Gibraltar was the only spot of land in the whole of continental Europe that remained in Allied hands throughout the whole war. General Eisenhower later wrote that Gibraltar made possible the invasion of Northwest Africa. Without it, the vital air cover could not have been quickly established on the North African airfields. The British official naval historian of the war, Captain Roskill, wrote, "It is no exaggeration to say that the rock fortress itself, its airfield, its dockyard, its storage and communication facilities, and the anchorage available for the great assembly of ships in the adjacent bay formed the hub around which the wheel of the whole enterprise revolved." Needless to say, the people of Gibraltar played their important part in this great venture. Many local men, their survivors here with us today, served at that time in the Gibraltar Defense Force, remaining in Gibraltar to defend it throughout the war, even though their women and children had been evacuated. They were the predecessors of the Gibraltar Regiment, whom you see on parade here today. The situation of Gibraltar was not without grave and obvious risk. Hitler had a plan called Ilona for marching through Spain to take Gibraltar and thus control the entrance to the Mediterranean. Had he done so, Malta could not have been held, nor would torch have been possible. In the end, he did not implement his plan because he misjudged Allied intentions. In addition, Hitler sought to provoke General Franco of Spain to himself move in and capture Gibraltar. Sir Samuel Hoare, British ambassador in Madrid at that time, reported to the Foreign Office as follows, and I quote him, "The temptation to cut our lines of communication will be very great. We shall appear to have put our necks between two Spanish knives, the mainland Spanish and the Spanish Morocco. The Germans will be on General Franco's back, dinning into his ears, 'Now is your time, you can cut the Allied throat,' destroying the naval and air base at Gibraltar, and win a dazzling reward for your country in North Africa. Let no one underestimate this temptation or think that because 9 Spaniards out of 10 don't want war, General Franco might not risk it," unquote. And so, it was against this backdrop of excitement and danger that the menfolk of Gibraltar worked side by side with their United Kingdom and American military colleagues to defend Gibraltar from possible attack, whilst at the same time assembling fighter aircraft, provisioning ships, loading and unloading rations, supplies and ammunitions round the clock in a vast quantity in an incessant chain to and from ships and airplanes and into and out of massive stores inside the rock and its tunnels. And so Gibraltar, despite its small size, played a vital role in Operation Torch and thus a significant part in eventual victory in the war as a whole. The people of Gibraltar had sacrificed their homes and their way of life in evacuation abroad for 4 long years. It is a record of which the Rock and its people have every right to be proud. This event is one of the early fruits of the Gibraltar American Council, a body of friends of Gibraltar in the United States set up through the hard work and commitment to Gibraltar of men like Perry Stiglitz, who runs the Gibraltar Government's office in Washington, and Nick Luddington, who runs the Gibraltar American Council itself. I wish to express to them my heartfelt thanks and appreciation for their work, and to Toby Roosevelt for her unstinting support of the Gibraltar American Council. Our military connection with the United Kingdom goes back long before Operation Torch and continues to this very day. It is represented here today by Commander British Forces, Gibraltar, Commodore Taylor, and units of his commands here in Gibraltar. But our military relationship with the United States is also longer and broader than Torch. Indeed, we stand beneath this arch, which is known as the American War Memorial, and is the memorial to the American military personnel who lost their lives in the First World War. Hence our choice of this spot for this plaque commemorative of Operation Torch. Since those war days, Gibraltar has hosted many visits by US warships and airplanes, and we continue to do so with great pleasure and, I hope, hospitality. Only last week we had a visit by the USS Narwhal, and today we have with us the United States ship San Juan, whose officers and men are also represented here at this ceremony. The United States Navy have a home away from home here in Gibraltar, and we hope that they will put it to increasing use. I would therefore express my welcome to Rear Admiral Metzger of the US Navy and to Mrs. Metzger, and also to Major General and Mrs. MacDonald of the US Army Reserve. I hope that you all have an enjoyable and rewarding time during this visit to Gibraltar, and that there will be many other visits in the future. It is an honor and privilege for the government and people of Gibraltar to have you all here with us today. It is therefore now with great pleasure and pride and honor, and with profound respect and gratitude to all those who gave their lives in Operation Torch, that I now unveil the plaque in commemoration of them.
Following the unveiling, His Lordship the Bishop, Monsignor Charles Caruana, then blessed the plaque. Nick Luddington from the Gibraltar American Council then took the stand to address those present.
Torch was a great success, and it was the success the Allies badly needed. We were losing the Battle of the Atlantic, and the U.S. was bogged down in fierce fighting in the Solomon Islands, in Guadalcanal. One positive note: the Germans had been stopped at El Alamein. Torch lighted the path to subsequent Allied D-Days: Sicily, Italy, Normandy. What makes Torch important to this day is that Torch formed a working partnership between the British and American military that continues to this day through Korea, Vietnam, the Falklands, and the Persian Gulf. Gibraltar played a vital role during Torch. Eisenhower said, as the Chief Minister reported earlier, without Gibraltar, there could not have been Torch. Gibraltar provided the communications center, the airbase for control of the skies, and Gibraltar was on the front lines. No one knows how precious freedom is better than Gibraltarians. And we all know the price of freedom is largely and highly paid for with the lives of young men and women. For those of us who went to war, any peacekeeping operation, and came back to enjoy the fruits of life and success, it is not for us to forget those who were left behind. Torch is a great moment in British, American, and Gibraltar history. It is a story of courage, daring, comradeship that all who visit Gibraltar should know about. I join the Chief Minister in thanking his distinguished guests and visitors here today for making this a day that will live in history. Churchill said, "Torch was the end of the beginning." So it was here in Gibraltar that the beginning of the end begun. I salute all of you who served with the Gibraltar Defense Force. I know the chairman and the president are here, and I salute you, sir.
Following Mr. Ludington's address, a minute's silence was observed in memory of those who fell during Operation Torch. The pipes and drums of the Gibraltar Regiment then played along Reveille. The sounds of the American national anthem brought the proceedings to a close. Following the ceremony and in a less formal atmosphere, the traditional tree planting took place. One at the Mount, hosted by the Chief Minister,
Thank you very much indeed. Now, I think the tradition has it. Tradition has it that you also have to water. This is easier because it's got all right.
Since we don't have tradition to apply the holy flag.
All right.
and another at the convent.
Get on with it, girl.
We took this opportunity to ask Mrs. Eisenhower about her famous grandfather.
I was very privileged to have known him for quite a while. I believe I was 21 when he died. And he was truly a wonderful man. You always knew where you stood with him. There was no guessing with him. He was a very warm person, at the same time very demanding.
Well, he had to be, obviously. He was the leader of one of the major operations in World War II.
Absolutely.
It was his first command, right? And obviously from here he went on to success. Had this not been a success, what do you think his career would have been like?
Very hard to say, certainly not what it was. One thing that was very interesting, and before coming to Gibraltar I did some background reading, and there was a memo sort of to the file that he wrote that I think is absolutely fascinating. It was almost written sort of like a small town farm boy who's finally done something that he's very proud of. He's achieved something, and it was wonderful the way he talked about how excited he was that he was going to be leading the command. It truly was his first opportunity, and one that he was very proud of and very aware that it was his big moment, his big possibility.
And talking of moments, we had a very emotional moment yesterday with the ceremonial at the unveiling of the plaque. What were your impressions of that?
It was a beautiful ceremony, and the plaque is truly an honor to my grandfather. I know he'd be very proud, extremely proud.
Whilst a lot has been said during the program about General Eisenhower, we mustn't forget the figure of Sir Winston Churchill.
I think his legacy is a Europe that is free, peaceful, and increasingly united. He saw the mistakes that were made immediately after the First World War, when politicians like Lloyd George were saying, "We will squeeze the German lemon till the pips squeak." It was a very popular sentiment with the British electorate and the French electorate to push the Germans hard for unrealistic levels of reparations that they had to pay, millions and millions of Deutschmarks. And that led to the collapse of the German economy and the rise of an extremist such as Hitler. And it's significant that in 1919, at the Peace Treaty of Versailles, my grandfather, with incredible prophecy, said, "This is not a peace. This is only an armistice of 20 years. And precisely 20 years later, we had the start of the Second World War. And it was, above all, the fact that no sooner had we knocked the Germans down a second time than my grandfather, in 46, no longer Prime Minister, goes to Zurich and makes a remarkable speech. He said, "I'm now going to tell you something which will surprise you." He could have said, "which will shock you," because it did shock many people. "The future peace of Europe must depend on rebuilding the relationship between France and Germany." Basically saying, having knocked the Germans down, we must now pick them up, we must give them economic aid, and it was that policy that was successful. And within 4 years, we had the creation of NATO, and fairly soon after that, the Germans were invited to join as allies on our side. And that was the basis for creating the harmony and peace that we have in Europe today. And he, more than anybody, was the architect of that. And of course, the true importance of my grandfather's contribution is, I believe, that had it not been for Churchill, in the summer of 1940, Britain would have surrendered to Hitler. It would have been dressed up. It would have been a negotiated peace. Many of the politicians, not my grandfather, of course, would have remained in place. And then Hitler would have gone east with all his forces. Having made a meal of the Russians, he would then have come back and dealt with Britain. And we would have had concentration camps and Gestapo, the same as the rest of Europe. And of course, there would have been no springboard from which the Americans could have launched the D-Day landings. That couldn't have happened from 3,000 miles away across the Atlantic. And it is no exaggeration to say that had it not been for Churchill, the Nazi swastika could still be flying over all the capital cities of Europe. And if you ask me what was his contribution, I would say that was the contribution. And there is no single man who, in the greatest war of history, made a greater individual contribution